One of my most enjoyable and fulfilling parts of my magical practice is working on my Book of Shadows. It's natural to feel excited about creating one, but many witches struggle with getting started. You may wonder what to write, what kind of book to use, how to write it. Don't worry, you're not alone. Don't let your fear of making mistakes or not knowing how to get started keep you from creating your magical journal. Here are 10 tips to help you get started and navigate your Book of Shadows journey, plus a bonus tip at the end, so stay tuned. As someone with a lot of experience with Books of Shadows, I can tell you that they have been an invaluable resource for me on my magical journey. Over the years, I've used a variety of books for my Book of Shadows, from simple composition notebooks to more aesthetically pleasing journals. I've even made videos showing the insides of my most recent Book of Shadows, which you can check out if you're interested. Up here, I'll have it linked. In the beginning, I was hesitant to start a Book of Shadows because I was afraid of making mistakes or not having the right materials. However, I regret not starting one earlier because it's been so helpful to be able to look back and see how my practice has changed and evolved over time. If you're just starting out on your magical path, I highly recommend starting a Book of Shadows right away. It may seem intimidating at first, but trust me, you'll be glad to have a record of your progress later on. Tip number 1, you don't need a fancy book. When it comes to choosing a book for your Book of Shadows, don't worry too much about the appearance. Whether it's a simple spiral notebook or a more fancy leather journal, what matters most is that you have a place to record your magical practices and progress. In the long run, you won't care what your first Book of Shadows looked like. You'll just be grateful that you have it. So don't be afraid to use what you already have on hand, whether that's a leftover school notebook or a store-bought journal. And if you're practicing in secret or can't afford to buy a new fancy book, that's completely okay. When you're a beginner, everything is new to you, and it's easiest and most practical to start out with a cheap notebook or binder, something you can be messy with. Remember, it's the intention and the writing inside the book that are most important, not the appearance of the physical book itself. Tip number 2, don't let perfectionism stand in the way of creating your book. Your Book of Shadows doesn't have to be pretty. When you're first starting out, the goal should really be on the learning and not spending hours and hours making beautiful aesthetic pages. Your book does not have to be pretty. That can come with books later down the road. I can relate to the fear of making mistakes in a Book of Shadows. I've had a book for years that I've never written in because I was afraid of ruining it with mistakes. But I've come to realize that it's better to use the book and make some mistakes than to never write in it at all. The information I have now might not be something I remember in the future, and it's important to record it for reference. It's also important to remember that it's okay to make mistakes in your Book of Shadows. In fact, it's inevitable. Even in my newest Book of Shadows, I made mistakes, but I didn't let that stop me from continuing to write. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't throw away my entire book because of a few mistakes. They show who I was at that moment in time and what my practice was like. As long as you can understand the contents of your Book of Shadows, it doesn't need to be perfect. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. Don't feel like you have to create the most beautifully written book ever. If you're just starting out, don't make the same mistake I did. Don't be afraid of making mistakes and not writing at all. It's better to write something down, even if it's not perfect, than to miss out on the opportunity to record your practice and journey. Tip 3. Make a rough Book of Shadows first. If you're interested in creating a visually appealing Book of Shadows, here's some advice. Start by getting a cheap notebook and use this as a rough draft. This allows you to take messy notes and make rough sketches without worrying about ruining a more aesthetically pleasing book. Think of this rough draft as a place to jot down everything you learn and experience without worrying about organization or perfection. After all, it's called a rough Book of Shadows for a reason. Once you have all your ideas and experiences recorded, you can transfer them to a more polished book if you choose. This method allows you to capture everything you want to remember without the pressure of making it look perfect from the start. Tip number 4, write in pencil first. If you're worried about making mistakes in your book of shadows, a useful tip is to write in pencil first. This allows you to fix any mistakes before making them permanent with pen. I've used this method in some of my books, including my most recent one. I started out writing in pencil, but eventually gave up on that and just wrote in pen instead. While there are mistakes in the later pages where I had to cross something out, that's okay. Using a pencil first can make the process less stressful, as you know that you can fix any mistakes before making them permanent. If you do choose to write in pencil first, I suggest using a kneaded eraser because they are softer and the standard ones can be harder and leave marks on your paper. Tip number 5, use a binder instead of a notebook. Binders are a great way to stay organized because you can add, remove, and rearrange the pages easily. If you're not a fan of the traditional 3-ring binder style for your Book of Shadows, you might want to consider using a spring post binder instead. These binders have a heavy-duty cover like a regular binder, but inside they have straight bars rather than the rings. This allows you to remove and rearrange pages easily while still maintaining a cohesive book-like appearance. When the binder is full, you can't see the metal bars at all, unlike the rings, and it looks more like a regular book. You still use a standard 3-hole punch with a spring post binder, so it's simple to use. Plus, you can customize the cover to make it more personal if you want. If you decide later on that you want to transfer the information from your binder into a written Book of Shadows, you can do so easily. This is a great option for those who want the flexibility of a binder with the aesthetic appeal of a regular book. Tip number 6, write first, organize later. When first starting out, don't worry about making a contents list or trying to make everything perfectly organized. It's natural to want to have a perfectly organized Book of Shadows, with everything in its designated place. However, it's important to remember that we learn sporadically and often come across new bits of information at random times. As a result, it can be difficult to get your Book of Shadows to match a predetermined contents list perfectly. That's okay. We are constantly learning, and you will likely find new information to add to your book as you go along. It's simply not possible to learn everything there is to know about a topic all at once, so don't worry about trying to include everything in a section at one time. The most important thing is to record the information you have, and you can always reorganize your Book of Shadows later if needed. Don't worry so much about the order of everything, and don't second guess yourself. Just write as you go. This can be very freeing and can help alleviate the stress of writing in a Book of Shadows. Tip number 7, it can be digital. It's important to remember that a Book of Shadows doesn't have to be a physical book. There are many other options available, such as a Word document on your computer or a note in your phone's Notes app. Using an online document, such as Google Drive, can also be a convenient choice as it allows you to work on your Book of Shadows from anywhere and at any time. This is especially useful if you have difficulty physically writing or if you struggle with handwriting or spelling. Like me, I'm dyslexic, so spell check is really a lifesaver. Another benefit of using an online system is that you can use speech-to-text software to dictate your entries, which can be helpful if you have physical challenges that make writing difficult. Just be sure to save and back up your online Book of Shadows regularly to prevent data loss. Tip number 8, choose the right tools. When it comes to creating your Book of Shadows, it's important to choose a writing style and instrument that you can consistently maintain. This means selecting a simple font and a pen that are suitable for the paper you are using and that you can easily replace when needed. For example, if you choose a fancy calligraphy script that is too time-consuming or difficult to maintain, it might not be practical for you to use. On the other hand, if you use a pen with liquid ink, such as a fountain pen on handmade paper, it may bleed and feather, making it difficult to read. In this case, it's better to use a pen with archival ink, such as a Pigma Micron pen, that is fade-proof and easy to replace. You can also test different pens on the back of the last page to see how they work on your specific paper. Remember, your Book of Shadows is a personal journal, so don't worry about making it super aesthetically pleasing or perfect. As long as you can understand the contents and it reflects your magical journey, that's all that really matters. Tip number 9, you don't have to add illustrations, but you can. There's nothing wrong with a book of shadows that's just words. However, some people like to add pictures. If you aren't super artistic and can't draw, this is for you. If you're looking to make your book of shadows more unique, one thing you could consider is incorporating different elements into it beyond just written text. This could include incorporating images, illustrations, or other visual elements that reflect your personal practice and interests. You can print images from online or cut out pictures from magazines or old books to glue in or use stickers or washi tape. You could also consider adding physical objects to your book of shadows, such as pressed flowers, crystals, or other small items that have significance to you. By adding these type of elements to your book of shadows, you can create a truly personalized and unique representation of your magical journey. Tip number 10, put it in your own words. Remember, your book of shadows is meant to be personal and reflect your own beliefs and experiences. As you learn and take notes, try to write things in your own words so that it makes sense to you. This not only makes the book more personal and meaningful to you, but it also helps you to better understand and remember the information. Of course, it's okay to include some things verbatim, such as the Wiccan Rede or other poems, but be sure to properly cite your sources. To truly benefit from the learning process, take the time to study and understand the material rather than just copying everything word for word. Your book of shadows will be more authentic and valuable to you if you put in the effort to personalize it. Bonus! Tip number 11, just keep writing. The last bonus tip is to just keep writing. Don't listen when your inner critic tells you that a small mistake has ruined the whole book and you need to throw it out and start over. I promise you it's not worth it. Trust me on this. I have lost so many potential books of shadows because I was upset that I made a mistake or was so afraid to mess up that I never even started writing in the first place. 5 or 10 years down the line, you won't care what that first book looks like. You'll just be grateful that you have it. It doesn't matter how artistic you are or if your handwriting is less than perfect. Even if you make a lot of spelling mistakes and need to make corrections, keep writing in your book of shadows. As you progress on your magical journey, you'll be grateful to have those early writings to look back on. Don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back, as it's something that I personally deeply regret in my own practice, and I don't want you to have the same feeling of regret with your book of shadows. Remember, your book of shadows is a personal journal meant to document your journey through your craft and your magical practice. It's important to recognize that you are likely the only one who will be seeing it most of the time. This makes it much easier to create a book of shadows, as you don't have to worry about impressing anyone else or trying to meet their expectations. You can focus on creating a book that works for you and meets your needs. It doesn't have to be fancy or aesthetically pleasing. It just needs to be functional and useful to you. So don't worry about trying to make it perfect. Just focus on making it a valuable resource for your personal practice. I hope these tips were helpful for anyone looking to start their own book of shadows, but who may be feeling hesitant or unsure of where to begin. If you have any additional tips or advice for starting a book of shadows, please share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear them, and I'm sure other people would appreciate the insight as well. If you enjoy my videos on magical topics, please consider subscribing to my channel and leaving any questions, comments, or video suggestions in the comments section below. Wishing you all a magical day. See you in the next video. Blessings. Goodbye.